I'm in character. Hey there, folks. No real impetus for this topic. It's just something that I felt like talking through. And yeah, we're going to talk through it. Simply put, are method actors just egotistical assholes? So, before we start dipping into the wackiness that can result from method acting, we should probably go over some basics because I actually think method acting is pretty misunderstood. A lot of things that I think general audiences tend to think of when they think of method acting, while it does happen, and we'll get there, it's not indicative of what method acting is on the whole or what it necessarily needs to be. So, a quick and very oversimplified bit of history. I'm sure any scholars more familiar with the actual history of method acting than I am are about to get very mad at me for some oversimplifications and some broad strokes. But briefly, the actual term method acting comes from Lee Strasberg, but the roots of the idea go back a ways into the 1800s and Stanislavski in Russia. And so, to again vastly oversimplify, the primary job of an actor prior to the development of method acting techniques was to just learn all the lines and convey them with some semblance of emotion that the character might be feeling. Don't worry too much about it, though. Mostly just get your damn lines right. Now, that's not to imply that lines were delivered dispassionately with absolutely no emotion whatsoever. I mean, unless you were the Greek chorus, but then we're on to an entirely different tradition of acting and the idea of what that was even meant to be. So, broadly speaking, you go back to, say, Shakespeare's time, yes, there would be some emotion put into the delivery of things, but the most important parts were getting the lines right and saying it loud enough that the people in the back could hear you. Now, Stanislavski began to develop the notion that there should be a far more authentic sense of emotion and the gravity of what the character is going through. And what he suggested, or what he started directing things towards, was the idea of the actors starting to pull from their actual emotional history and that to then channel very legitimate emotions on the stage. So that, to put it simply, instead of pretending to cry, you would actually cry. You would go through a sort of mental system method in order to evoke real, genuine tears from you on stage. Basically, you get on stage, cut open your heart, and bleed on the audience. Metaphorically speaking, of course. So this was further developed and refined by Strasberg, as I said. And Strasberg had a lengthy list of very notable students. This would include people like James Dean, Marilyn Monroe, Jack Nicholson, Dustin Hoffman, Sally Field, Sidney Poitier, Gene Wilder, Al Pacino, and probably most essentially, at least early on, Marlon Brando. Brando was arguably sort of the reason method acting started getting real big in film, and I think appropriately so. Because I think ultimately method acting makes a lot more sense for film than it does for theater, if for no other reason than for the sake of the actor. This is something we are going to circle back on, but one of the possible things to knock against method acting is it is very emotionally draining at the best of times. And whereas in theater, if you are doing a professional show on, say, Broadway, you're going to have to engage with those emotions and bringing about that very real emotional reaction for audiences to see 8 shows a week. On film, yes, you'll have to do it repeatedly for the take, but once the scene's done, you get to stop doing it. So arguably, film is a better home for these techniques than theater is. And it is worth noting the toll that method acting can take on actors. There in some cases, a very notable physical toll with the direction some actors take it. But again, we'll kind of come back to that. But broadly speaking as someone who, has done stage acting and some film acting, nothing really at a professional level, but I have done it. And I've at least had the experience on one occasion of having to portray a character who was in a very, very dark headspace and playing that part and having to understand that character and be able to dwell in that space well enough to convey it to an audience. It kind of messed me up for about a month after the show was done. For the record, that was a production of Sunset Limited by Cormac McCarthy, which should be your big clue as to how dark the thing was. But I'm not saying that I'm like some fine method actor on scale with literally any of the names that I listed for you, but I am saying that I have an awareness of the fact that really getting into a character, really getting into a headspace, really understanding and dredging up very genuine emotions, it does stuff to you, and not always positive. Method acting, especially in serious dramatic contexts of things like a breakdown or sobbing or a panic attack or something like that, you are basically dredging up and re-engaging with your own trauma. Well, possibly your own. As far as method goes, there are some actors who will just basically pull from their own life experience comparable situations that will dredge up enough of a feeling to be able to say, get the tears going. Again, to really oversimplify it, if you have to cry over the death of another character, but you have not had a particular personal loss of an important person in your life, maybe you think of the death of your beloved childhood pet and the tears come and you can still direct that emotion to this new purpose. The alternative is to really try and dwell in a character's headspace so much and understand them so well that you aren't crying over your cat. You're actually crying over this person because you have gotten such a thorough understanding of the character you're portraying that you are feeling the fake emotions of the not real character incredibly genuinely without even necessarily having to pull from your own experience. That takes, I don't want to say more work or more skill. It is a choice that is a very large commitment. And this starts to take us into the direction of some of the things that method acting and method actors are a little bit notorious for. Because I think you ask the average, say, film goer, what is a method actor? A lot of them will probably say something along the lines of, oh, that's somebody who doesn't break character ever, right? Sometimes. The short version is that is by no means a requirement of method acting. That is not baked into the process or the practice of it. What is true is that there's actually a ton of reasons to not break character. And also, even the term not break character can have a variety of meanings. It can be as simple as not dropping an accent between takes because you're worried you're not going to get it back because it's not your natural speaking voice and you just want to stay in that mode. Or it could be literally responding to things a bit more like the character would and less like you, which might make the version of yourself that the cast and crew have to deal with might be more volatile, more grumpy, more energetic, more any number of things that you might not be because you are trying to hold on to that character. Now, the ones who take it to that degree, legitimately not breaking character, not just maintaining an accent or maintaining a physical affectation or something, but genuinely not breaking character, I would say that the vast majority of actors who do that are method actors, but nowhere near all method actors do that. So I understand where the notion of oh, that's what method actors do, isn't it? The people who do that are method actors, but that's not necessarily what method actors do. So going down that path, we start to get into, some of the less pleasant stuff. I mentioned coming back to the potential damage to actors And I've touched on sort of the emotional and potentially even psychological borderline trauma that you are inducing in yourself. But there's also the physical aspect. Because while it's not necessarily exclusive to method actors, looking at a list of people who use method acting, they seem to have a much higher percentage of pushing their bodies in unhealthy directions. So I think one of the most famous, I guess, or possibly notorious instances of this, don't worry, the really juicy one that you're thinking about, we'll get to him later. First, let's talk about Christian Bale. Christian Bale has yo-yoed specifically his weight and musculature many, many times for movie after movie. He bulked up and got very muscular for Batman. Actually, reportedly, too much. He was kind of like built like a bear initially. And they're like, okay, that's actually, that you look like a brick wall. That's a little too much. We're going for more of a ninja type thing. We need to streamline you a little bit. Or he just gained a lot of just flat out fat in order to play Dick Cheney in a movie. And then there is his part in The Machinist, where he lost a disturbing amount of weight.
If you were any thinner, you wouldn't exist.
If you're wondering how this squares with the video I did earlier this year talking about the now completely unreasonable expectations for the bodies of our movie stars, it actually tracks all with that pretty well. Because rather than finding actors who already are these bodies, they find an actor who then pushes themselves, potentially very unhealthily, to become what they are not naturally. The fact that there are some occasions where it's done in the direction of emaciation rather than bulking up doesn't really change the fact that the expectations for body alteration all kind of feed into the same culture within Hollywood. Now, there can, and often is, be a certain amount of praise for the lengths that an actor like Bale is willing to take their body, and it's seen as a really strong commitment to the craft. I really, personally, really wish that actors didn't do this. Especially at this point, where we have the means, broadly speaking, between simple things like prosthetics or body doubles to even more complicated things like facial replacement on another person's body, someone who is more naturally that shape and that didn't necessarily starve themselves to become that. You know, there are ways to do this that do not have to jeopardize health, because it really needs to be underlined. This is a massive hazard.
Do you think you're going to do less of that going forward? Are you worried about sort of like what those dramatic
mortality?
Fluctuations can do for your long-term health?
Yeah, I'm 45 now. I'm beginning to actually worry about it.
Yeah.
I'm not worried about it. Just think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Christian Bale, I'm actually shocked we have not heard that he's had serious health complications from the stuff he's done, because it has happened to other actors. Matt Damon lost a whole bunch of weight to play the role of a heroin addict back in the 90s. The movie was Courage Under Fire, and it's not that surprising that Damon was willing to go to these extremes. He was a young actor. This was one of his really early big breaks. He got to be in scenes with Denzel Washington, for crying out loud, and he lost so much weight that afterwards his doctor basically told him, okay, well, so the good news is your heart didn't shrink, but if you ever lose or gain weight that rapidly again, you're going to be back in here with a heart attack. Another thing that's interesting about Courage Under Fire is Damon did this without any supervision. I couldn't find definitively whether or not the producers or the director expected him to lose weight, but the way that he did was completely outside of any supervision or any help. That's part of why it jeopardized his health to the degree that it did. But the reason I bring this up is this extreme body alteration is not necessarily expected by the people making the movie. This can, and from what I can find frequently, is an expectation that actors place on themselves. Be it because they're young and hungry actors like Damon was, thinking that he needs to show this level of commitment to the role, or be it the kind of thing that Christian Bale has said about just feeling like this is what the character would be like and I need to inhabit that.
And it becomes some kind of a marker of commitment to your craft or whatever. Right. And it was never, I never viewed it as that. I just sort of went, oh, I think I have to do this, whatever.
But by and large, Damon does appear to have learned his lesson from this.
I ended up on medication and stuff. It was a stupid thing to do.
Which is not to say he hasn't had some degree of body alteration. He got into fighting shape for the Bourne films, and he did end up losing some weight when he got ready for the Odyssey, but these were done under supervision, under much more closely monitored situations, and over a longer length of time than the stuff he did to himself for Courage Under Fire. And one of the things I can't help but wonder when I look at what Matt Damon did and what Christian Bale continues to do, is this even worth it for the roles they're playing? Yes, his portrayal of Batman is going to be legendary for a very, very long time, but who still remembers he even played Dick Cheney? And if you remember the film The Machinist at all, do you remember anything about the plot? Do you remember what the story was? What was a real memorable moment other than gawking at how thin he was? There's nothing memorable about The Machinist other than how thin he got. And you really have to wonder if this had caused permanent damage to his heart or his body, would that have been worth it for this movie? And then if you ask that, maybe you need to start asking, is that worth it for any movie? And to be fair, Bale himself fully recognizes that what he does should be the exception and not an expectation.
Yeah, I worry when it becomes sort of a marker of, oh, how committed are you to a role? How much did you lose? And that eventually there'll be some tragedy because of this.
Right.
You know, it should be an anomaly.
It shouldn't surprise you, given that I am very much on board with the notion in, say, video games. I want fewer games made by people who were paid more to work less, and I am more than willing to apply a similar logic to things like movies. I don't think people should have to break their bodies for their work. Now, in the case of method actors, especially bigger name ones, they may well be voluntarily doing that, whereas, say, a crunched video game developer is being forced to do that. But at the same time, I don't think people should be killing themselves for their art. Although I do have to ultimately also deal with the fact that, as someone who very much believes in bodily autonomy, if they want to do that, I suppose I can't really justify trying to stop them. I just really worry about it as a practice at all. And I'm sure that there is an argument that could be made that actually transforming their real bodies, as opposed to making use of prosthetics to simulate having gained weight, or body doubles to simulate having lost weight, that actually embodying and dwelling in that physical form themselves actually informs the performance in some way. I can't discount that, but I am going to circle back to the question of, okay, but is that worth it? Look, I don't think very much of Todd Phillips' Joker movie, but I won't deny that Joaquin Phoenix's performance is the best thing in it, because the man threw himself into that part 100%. But while he really gave it his all, I'm still not sure how comfortable I am in knowing that that involved getting this thin. But if I were to talk to him about it, and if he made the argument, my performance wouldn't have been what it was if I wasn't in that physical state, and I suspect he probably would make that argument. I can't control another person, but I can say, boy, I'd rather you didn't do that. Moving on. Actually, not moving on quite yet. Let's come back to Joaquin Phoenix, who engaged in an experiment in method acting that really kind of got out of hand. Folks may or may not remember the mockumentary film I'm Still Here, in which Casey Affleck followed Joaquin Phoenix around upon his announcement of retiring from acting and starting a rap career. It involved a hell of a lot of very erratic behavior, a not very pleasant at all appearance on the David Letterman show, and then eventually the admission that none of it was real. He wasn't really retiring from acting to become a rapper. He wasn't genuinely having a public breakdown. But he was willing to pretend that he was in order to make a mockumentary that I suspect most of you don't remember. That's a case where it really feels like it got out of hand, simply because it started involving people who did not agree to this. part of the nature of making a movie is ideally everybody involved is signing off on what it is they're making. Of course, the reality is there's plenty of people, especially ground level folks, PAs, grips, folks just adjusting the lighting or the sound or whatever, who are just there because they need the work and they need to pay their bills, and maybe they don't have that much of a commitment to this specific project. That is the reality. But at least in theory, everyone signed up to be there on a movie set. When you make a mockumentary and you decide that your movie set is the world at large, well, you're roping a hell of a lot of people into participating and dealing with your method acting who didn't sign up to deal with that. And I think that's kind of where a lot of the negativity towards method actors tends to come, and not undeservedly, because if you start becoming a problem, if your method, no matter how good of a performance it results in, if your method starts jamming up the works and making the shooting harder, are you actually helping or not? The, I think, big name to talk about in that, at least these days, would be Jared Leto. Now, I don't like bringing up Leto at all if I can help it, and obviously he now has a whole new round of allegations. I am not going over all that, but I can't have a conversation about method acting and not deal with the guy. So Jared Leto has a number of things on his resume as being particularly infamous instances of method acting. And I would say the two big ones, these are by no means the only projects that he was doing method in, but the ones where it got most out of hand were Suicide Squad and Morbius. Suicide Squad mostly resulted in off-screen antics that are just, any one of the things he did should have been a fireable offense. In his attempt to embody the Joker, and if I were to guess, he would probably deny this. If I were to guess, really wanting to one-up the late Heath Ledger, and having heard that Ledger locked himself in a hotel for a while and had a journal with these crazy thoughts to really get into it. Leto somehow came to the conclusion that one-upping that meant embodying the chaos of the Joker so much that he was sending dead rats and used condoms to his co-stars, which should have gotten him fired. That is a fucked up thing to do, and justifying it as going well, it's what the Joker would have done is not okay. And then there was Morbius. Now, Morbius is a movie in which he plays a character with, at least initially, severe physical impairment. Now, I don't know how accurately he portrayed any specific condition. I don't even know if it was a real condition he was portraying. Given the nature of the movie, I suspect there was probably some wonkiness on whether or not it was real, but he made the decision that he was going to get himself around on his crutches at a very, very slow pace, resulting in reportedly 45-minute bathroom breaks. Something the director basically confirmed, which I was kind of surprised to hear, because honestly, while I don't doubt that his decision to continue to move around on these crutches was a problem, hearing that, I was like, that feels like an exaggeration. I bet you I can't source that. And then I found this. It's an older article and some of the visual assets are missing, but this is real, and here was the exchange.
I heard a story about filming, and I want to see if this is true. Someone told me that Jared Leto was so committed to playing Michael Morbius that even when he had to go to the bathroom, he would use his crutches and slowly limp to get to the bathroom. But it was taking so long between pee breaks that a deal was made with him to get him a wheelchair so someone could wheel him there quicker, and he agreed to that. Is that true?
Yes.
All right.
Yeah, because I think what Jared thinks, what Jared believes, is that somehow the pain of those movements, even when he was playing normal Michael Morbius, he needed, because he's having this pain his whole life. Even though, as he's alive and strong, it has to be a difference. Hey man, it's people's processes.
If they're in the middle of shooting a scene and he needs to use the bathroom, if it takes him 45 minutes round trip to go and use the bathroom, that's 45 minutes on a film set where time is money, where nobody can work because their star isn't there. That is where method acting full on clashes and careens and just breaks itself head on with the practicalities of trying to shoot a film. It's very easy, if you want to discredit the notion of method acting as being something that just assholes with a big ego do, you can point at Jared Leto, and it's hard to argue with that. He took things to a degree that just made the whole shooting process worse. And I don't think it made his performance any better. But, and this is probably going to be a heretical question in some circles, is it really all that different from what Daniel Day-Lewis did on the set of My Left Foot? Really, though. There are some things that you could point out. You could point out that My Left Foot is an Oscar-winning role, and it was an Oscar-winning performance, and Morbius was Morbius. But the thing is, almost nobody sets out to make a bad movie. Everyone's trying to make a good movie. Yes, Morbius turned out like garbage, but that doesn't mean that the people working on it shouldn't or didn't give it their all to try and make it a good movie. I may think that Jared Leto has an absolutely out of control ego, but if he thought that this had the potential to be something really good, is there a big difference with the degree to which he took it versus Daniel Day-Lewis? Now, if you don't know My Left Foot, just as a real quick overview on that movie came out in 1989. It was a small budget film in which Day-Lewis was the biggest star. It was about a real-life man named Christy Brown who had cerebral palsy and basically learned to function day-to-day through use of his feet, as he had basically no practical use of the rest of his limbs. And Day-Lewis committed to that. It meant that the crew had to carry him around. They had to spoon feed him when it was lunchtime. And I'm sorry, I hear that, and I hear about Jared Leto, and I ask again, what is really the difference? I mean, aside from the fact that one of them has an academic honors section on his Wikipedia page, and the other has a sexual misconduct allegations section on his Wikipedia page, but just for the purposes of these roles, what's the difference? I mean, you could try to argue on the basis of we kind of heard stories of the crew being legitimately fed up with Leto, and we didn't really get stories about that with Day-Lewis, at least not that I can find. But is that because the crew didn't mind? Or was it because he was the biggest actor on the thing and a lot of the people involved were just getting into the industry? Writer-director Jim Sheridan was literally his first film. Given that Day-Lewis's involvement is almost certainly what got the thing financed in the first place, could they afford to complain about this even after the fact? Now, I'm not saying that that's definitely the case, that they were annoyed and felt they couldn't say anything, but if they were annoyed, would they have? I'd kind of be surprised. I suppose, dealing with only those specific projects, the main meaningful difference between what Day-Lewis was doing and what Leto was doing is that Day-Lewis was portraying a real person. So one could make the argument that he had more of an obligation to take it to these extremes in order to better represent and therefore better honor a real person who really existed, that this movie was trying to bring his story across. I'm not sure I buy that, but it is a position and an argument that I think you could make. Whereas again, with Leto, he was playing Michael Morbius. I think there's at least a little bit of a difference between trying to bring across a real life person's real experiences through your performance and trying to embody a comic book character that the average person has literally never heard of. And the fact that I'm bringing up Daniel Day-Lewis at all should make the point that this isn't exactly new. We have stories about somebody like Jared Leto, and the worst of that stuff is relatively recent. But also recently, we have stories about Austin Butler embodying Elvis for months, years even, basically losing contact with his family because he was too busy being Elvis. Again, if that's the level with which he wants to commit to that part, I can't tell him he's not allowed to do that, but I definitely get uncomfortable when people decide to praise that or highlight it as a good or admirable or in some way a higher degree of acting. There's a anecdote that I heard, and I don't know if this is true, but I'm going to share it regardless because it makes the point that I want to make. So take this story with a grain of salt. Do not take it as gospel, but its point matters to my point here. In the movie Marathon Man, Shakespearean legend Laurence Olivier plays the villain, and Dustin Hoffman plays the hero. And there is a scene in which Dustin Hoffman's character is tortured. And in preparation for that, Hoffman basically didn't sleep the entire night, so he came into the filming the next day looking just awful, bedraggled, heavy bags under his eyes, kind of, leaning against things for support because he felt unsteady on his feet. And Laurence Olivier went up and asked him, "Good grief, why are you in such a state? What happened to you?" And Dustin Hoffman goes, "Well, I didn't sleep last night because I really want to get a sense of being, physically drained and bedraggled, and just I want to really embody what's happening to this to my character." And Laurence Olivier goes, "Dear boy, why don't you just try acting?" So, just so I don't get a whole bunch of corrections in the comments, I did look into this during the editing phase of this video, and it is about half true. According to Hoffman, Olivier did say that to him because of how he looked coming in to shoot that scene. Hoffman says that the actual reason he was out all night is because he wasn't in a great place. He was going through a divorce. He went to Studio 54. And then when he came on set the next day, he kind of used the idea of method acting as a cover for why he looked the way he did. And according to him, Olivier saying that to him was basically a joke and not really something meant in seriousness, because he always got the impression that Olivier kind of understood what was going on. So it did happen, but the way it's been presented in the years since is not quite real to the actual events, at least as Hoffman has told them. But anyways, just wanted to get that out of the way.
Is it safe?
It is a very serious question. Does method acting actually result in a better performance? That's literally impossible to judge. Some of the most legendary actors and performances have been done by method actors. But also, just to throw this out there, Meryl Streep's not a method actor. Okay, minor correction on that. Meryl Streep appeared to use method acting techniques in order to play Miranda in The Devil Wears Prada. Although, according to at least one of her co-stars, she was miserable approaching the role that way. And other than that one instance, she's kind of famous for being able to completely turn it off the instant the camera stops rolling. As you might have guessed from that story involving Laurence Olivier, Shakespearean actors generally aren't method actors. Patrick Stewart's not a method actor. Ian McKellen's not a method actor. Judi Dench is not a method actor. Method acting is just that. It's a method. It's an approach to acting, but it's not innately better. And the people who choose to do it, that's the path that they've chosen to find a character, but it's not the only way to go about it. Now, it might be the best way for them to go about it, to be fair. Because again, a lot of it has to do with the idea of kind of dredging up very real feelings and very sincere emotions. And the camera is much more in your face than the stage is. So there is an argument to be made there that it results in something more than would have been the case with not using those techniques. But again, whether or not the end result is better than it would have been otherwise is unfalsifiable. We don't know. You literally can't prove that one way or the other. And just to make the point that Daniel Day-Lewis is not a complete outlier as being like the first person to start to quote unquote take it too far, or even if you don't think he went too far, taking it to some pretty notable extremes, like there are instances before that. Like there's plenty of people who kind of do the Christian Bale thing and did it well before him. Robert De Niro, very famously for Raging Bull, got into fighting shape to play a boxer and then gained a bunch of weight for the back end of the movie because the guy got out of shape, so Robert De Niro got out of shape. But then you've got somebody like Andy Kaufman. And Kaufman kind of veers closer to the level of what Joaquin Phoenix tried to do. Andy Kaufman, if you don't know, to a lot of people my age and certainly younger, if you know who he is at all, he's who Jim Carrey played in the movie Man on the Moon. He was a comedian who was incredibly dedicated to the bit, I suppose. He really stuck with whatever he decided to do. And if he thought something would be funny, he would commit to it full force. He had an entire alternate personality, that he had a full prosthetic makeup job that he would do, this deliberately terrible act, this character of Tony Clifton that he did because he thought it was funny. Reportedly, not very many other people did, but he thought it was funny, and he would commit to that, and he would commit to it so hard that it made other people's lives difficult, arguably even his own audience. In fact, Andy Kaufman never breaking character was kind of the guiding principle of that Man in the Moon movie. The writers interviewed a whole bunch of people who knew Kaufman, and when they talked to his girlfriend, Lynn Margulies, she told them flatly when they asked what the real Andy was like, that there was no real Andy. It was always just the characters. He had this whole extended bit of being a massive misogynist and challenging all these women wrestlers basically on the basis of, I can beat literally any woman. And he really used very sexist, misogynist language in this bit. And there is evidence and claims that it was a bit, and he didn't believe anything that he was saying, but he did it publicly and repeatedly and for so long that the impact of him doing that is probably about the same as it would have been if he had been doing it sincerely. But it is always important to remember with method actors that there are degrees of it. There are actors out there who do use certain method techniques but don't consider themselves method actors, probably just because they don't use as many of them or take it to the same degrees as the sorts of people we've been talking about. Timothée Chalamet doesn't consider himself a method actor, but he does similar amounts of research and deep dives in terms of coming up with full backstories for his characters so that he has a much better sense of what is driving that character. So it's not just a matter of read the line with this emotion. He looks at a line and goes, okay, here's how I'm going to play it, because based off everything that I have absorbed and come to know and understand about this character, here's how they would say this. And it arguably results in something that feels more authentic, or maybe not. Again, I can't look at Jared Leto's work and say that the method acting he employed in something like Suicide Squad or Morbius resulted in good performances or better performances or performances that were in any way worth it. Now, before we get towards the end, there's something that I want to note that you might have in fact noticed before. Even though I mentioned a couple of women being students of Lee Strasberg, I haven't talked about any women in regards to the most ridiculous stunts that end up happening. You may or may not have seen this article from Variety in which Anya Taylor-Joy says that women don't do method acting because we're not assholes like that. And she's not completely wrong, but to be clear, there are women who are method actors. But pretty much all of the people who take it to the extremes we've been talking about are always men. And I don't even want you to take that as some kind of anti-man statement. I think it has a lot more to do with pull and power. When talking about Leto and Day-Lewis, I mentioned how they were crucial to the film existing at all. They couldn't really get pushback. They were kind of irreplaceable. So whatever their quote-unquote process was something everybody else just had to deal with. There are very few, if any, women in Hollywood who think that their position is so unshakable that they could get away with stuff like that. I'm not saying that there isn't diva behavior, but there is a difference between being bitchy to a PA and holding up the entire production. A woman as the lead actor can probably get away with the first, she's unlikely to get away with the latter. So I don't think it's so much that women would never think to take it to these extremes, and much more that any woman who has ascended to a level of being in a lead role where this might apply knows well enough that she will be discarded the instant she tries to pull that stuff. I'd say the only thing you could argue is at all comparable is the weight loss thing, but that's not even do it for the role, that's do it to have a career at all. That's not a one-off pressure like guys experience to play a certain role. That is a constant thing that women are dealing with all the time, so I don't think that equates either. So again, to be clear, there are women who are method actors, but I couldn't really find any who took it to this degree. And that to me feels less indicative of there being an innate problem with men than just being a really good thing to point to with how much more men get away with in this industry in general, and they know it. But for as off the rails as the most absurd levels of method acting can get, it is worth remembering this is ultimately just a technique, and it's one that I personally am very mixed on. Like, I understand the drive to do it, and again, I don't want to say that actors shouldn't do it. I will say personally, I don't think actors should be taking it to a degree that it is disrupting the shooting, because like in the case of Morbius and potentially in the case of My Left Foot, we don't know, but definitely in the case of Morbius, he was the big name there. The director who was there, his biggest hit prior to that was Safe House with Denzel Washington, a movie that in fact never existed. I mean, you don't know. You didn't see it. But regardless, nobody really had the pull to call him out on it, and it really did seem to have to basically take a crew revolt and a negotiation with him just to get him to agree to a freaking wheelchair that they'd push for him. But he was attached as the star even before there was a director. He held the power, so they had to put up with him. I generally have a low tolerance for what, to me at least, reads as being somebody's ego being placed above the art and the job. Yes, filmmaking is art, but it's also a job. You are disrespecting people's time and their professional capacity in what they do when you pull stuff like this. And I will compare it to stuff that I've said about perfectionist directors. Because honestly, I don't think you are any less of an asshole for doing 100 takes of the same shot than you are for taking a 45-minute bathroom break because you insist on going with crutches. You are wasting people's time. You cannot possibly tell me that out of those 100 takes, you needed that many or that they varied that wildly. At a certain point, something was good enough and you need to move on. So yes, this is a call out to film snobs' favorite directors, such as David Fincher, and especially Stanley Kubrick. Actually, it's funny I bring up Stanley Kubrick because one could actually argue that what he put Shelley Duvall through on the set of The Shining, with isolating her from the other actors and the crew, telling people to not talk to her, the stress that he very deliberately put her under, was basically forcing method acting techniques onto her. Now, did that get him the performance that he wanted? I guess, eventually. Is it acceptable as far as I'm concerned? No! Because even in that case, it wasn't even her choice to take it to that extreme to the point that she had her hair falling out. No, somebody imposed that on her. Kubrick can go to hell. Jared Leto can go to hell. I'm not saying they're exactly the same. So far as I know, Kubrick didn't have sexual misconduct allegations. Though, I don't know. Maybe I'll double check his wiki after this just to be sure. There is definitely a danger of, honestly, anybody, but it's generally going to happen to either the star actors or the director. When anybody thinks that they are at the top of a pyramid, they are the end-all be-all, they are the reason any of this is happening, this is the kind of behavior you get. You get what is, frankly, unacceptable behavior and things that should not be put up with that then gets justified retroactively if the movie is good. Because again, we make fun of what he pulled in Morbius. People don't really make fun of what Daniel Day-Lewis did in My Left Foot because that's a good movie. People will make fun of Tommy Wiseau having to shoot the same thing over and over and over and over again because he was completely incompetent, but they will forgive Kubrick doing over 100 takes of the same thing because they like the end result. I am not okay with that. And before anyone tries to twist my words, no, this is not me saying that Clint Eastwood's policy of almost never giving people a second take is all that much better. But at the very least, that one doesn't waste time and yeah, has also resulted in some good movies. I'm saying that maybe there's a balance between the extremes. Do I love great art? Yes. Do I think great art should exist at the expense of other people's health, mental or physical? Their livelihoods, their time, their limited time on this damn planet? No, I don't. If you want to dedicate yourself to that degree, to a piece of art, Take up painting. Take up novel writing. Take up something where the only person whose time and energy and mental fortitude is going to be at risk is your own. This is a collaborative medium. You have to have respect for other people's time, expertise, and personhood. And sometimes the people who engage in this stuff just don't. But again, that is not all method act. Hashtag not all method actors. The stuff that people like Jared Leto or Joaquin Phoenix or Andy Kaufman, the stuff that they pull, that is not innately baked into method acting. But again, should the quality of the end result be considered worth it? Again, to make the comparison to video games, how many times is the excuse made, well, yeah, the dev team was crunched and worked 100-hour weeks, but the game was so great. I don't care. Don't treat people like that. Is method acting a bad thing for people, for movie sets? No. Are there a handful of people out there who use it either badly or as an excuse seemingly to just stroke their own ego? Yeah. Sometimes. Not always, though. Like I have said often enough that I put it on a t-shirt. Nothing is ever always. I didn't really have a grander point to make on this, especially ending on a, yeah, sometimes it is like that kind of note, which, you know, if I were better at this job, I'd have a more definitive statement. But I don't really this time. So what did you have to think about any of this? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon pays the bills, enables me to do this as my living. Even if you can't help me out that way, like, share, subscribe. Those will help. Don't worry too much about it, though. And now you get a dubbed over sign off because I accidentally did the wrong one. I'm going to blame it on being too in character. Please remember that you are beautiful, you are valid, and you are loved. You are the council. I'm just running the meetings, and until next time, this council is adjourned. And now to thank my highest supporting patrons: Robin Moore, Jared Boyce, Zubin Lutfula, Daphne Matthews, Kay Johnston, Auntie Kate 808, Mira G, Angry Casperl, Dave Hall, Snark Shark, Oliver B, Mystic Shadow, Sean Miller, Welsh Wrestling Geeks, Magdalena, Melissa Pedersen, Becky Sparks, Twilord, Tracy Scrabbit, Palba Rabajoggle, Sir Didymus is my favorite, and additionally from the lower tiers of support, I'd also like to thank Isabel Lovelace, Hey Chica, and Lee Campo. What are you guys doing? Oh my goodness, who's back there? Oh, Worm, why do you do this? Ah!